Have you ever wondered how much plastic you come into contact with on a daily basis? It's an omnipresent part of our modern lives, serving as the packaging for the food we eat, the bottles we drink from, and even the cling films wrapping our online vegetable orders. But have you ever stopped to think about what happens to this plastic after we've used it? Or what might be happening to it while we're still using it? This is where the concept of microplastics comes into play. These are tiny fragments of plastic, less than 5 millimeters in size, that break away from larger pieces of plastic. They're so small, in fact, that they can easily leach into the food and water that's stored in plastic containers. And when we consume these foods and drinks, we're also consuming these microplastics. Now you might be thinking, so what? They're so tiny, they can't possibly do any harm, right? Well, recent research from the University of Campania in Italy suggests otherwise. The study found that over half of the patients examined had microplastics embedded in their arteries, specifically in the carotid arteries that supply blood to the neck, face, and brain. These microplastics aren't just sitting there harmlessly. They're actually upping the risk of blockages and heart attacks within just 3 years. And remember, this is in addition to other known risk factors like high blood pressure, cholesterol, smoking, obesity, and diabetes. The most worrying part? We're ingesting these microplastics unconsciously through everything we put in our mouths. Every time we take a sip of water from a plastic bottle or bite into a vegetable that's been wrapped in cling film, we're potentially adding more microplastics to our system. So with every sip and every bite, you might be ingesting more than just nutrients. You might be swallowing tiny fragments of plastic that could be increasing your risk of heart disease. And that's a risk we can't afford to ignore. What happens when these tiny particles of plastic make their way into our bodies? That's a question that researchers from the University of Campania in Italy sought to answer. In a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, they discovered a silent threat lurking in our arteries: microplastics. Microplastics are minuscule fragments of plastic, less than 5 millimeters in size. The study found these tiny invaders in the arteries of over 50% of the 304 patients examined. Specifically, they were found in the carotid arteries, the primary blood vessels responsible for supplying blood to our neck, face, and brain. Now, why is this significant? The presence of microplastics in our arteries raises the risk of blockages and heart attacks. That's right. Within just 3 years, these particles can up the risk of heart attack and stroke by a whopping 4.5 times. We turn to Dr. Nishith Chandra, Principal Director of Interventional Cardiology at Fortis Escorts Heart Institute in New Delhi, for an in-depth explanation. According to Dr. Chandra, when microplastics enter our arteries, our immune system perceives them as foreign bodies and launches an attack. This interaction can result in chronic inflammation, which over time can damage the lining of our blood vessels. The damage can be serious enough to cause tears in the blood vessels and dislodge even the smallest plaque, triggering a blockage. Moreover, inflammation naturally constricts arteries, further obstructing blood flow. Over time, this constriction can narrow down the arteries enough to trigger a heart attack. Animal studies have further shown that microplastics can disrupt normal cardiac function and alter heart rate. The most alarming part? The average liter of bottled water contains around 240,000 particles from 7 types of plastics. Microplastics, it seems, have found a way to infiltrate even our most vital organs. You might be thinking, I don't eat plastic. How are these microplastics getting into my system? Well, the truth is as chilling as it is ubiquitous. Microplastics, those pesky particles smaller than 5 millimeters, are pervasive in our environment and daily lives. They sneak into our bodies through a variety of seemingly innocuous sources. Take, for instance, our fruits and vegetables. They often come wrapped in protective plastic films. When we consume these fresh produce, we unwittingly ingest the microplastics that have leached into them. It's a subtle invasion, one that's hard to detect and even harder to prevent. Then there's the water we drink. Whether it's from a plastic bottle or a tap, water is a prime carrier of microplastics. Bottled water, in particular, is a major culprit. Recent studies have found that a single liter of bottled water can contain an average of 240,000 plastic particles. And these aren't just any particles. They come from 7 different types of plastic, each with its own potential health risks. Water flowing through plastic pipes can also pick up microplastic particles, introducing them into our drinking water and, eventually, our bodies. It's a silent, invisible process that's happening every time we turn on the tap. And let's not forget seafood. Our oceans, rivers, and lakes are teeming with plastic debris. These break down into microplastics, which are then ingested by fish, particularly shellfish. When we cook and eat these seafood, we're also consuming the microplastics they've ingested. It's a hidden hazard, one that's often overlooked in our culinary enjoyment. So you see, microplastics have infiltrated our lives in ways we barely notice. And each day, with every bite of food and sip of water, we're unknowingly inviting them into our bodies. Invisible to the naked eye, these microplastics are silently invading our bodies. Our hearts are under siege, and microplastics are the stealthy assailants. This is an alarming reality that we are all grappling with, as the presence of microplastics in our daily lives is putting our heart health at risk. Let's delve deeper into how this happens. When these microplastics make their way into our bodies, they act like foreign invaders. Our immune system, in its bid to protect us, launches an attack on these invaders. This battle that ensues results in chronic inflammation, a condition that over time can cause severe damage to the lining of our blood vessels. Imagine a riverbed with a smooth surface. Now, picture that surface becoming rough and jagged due to constant erosion. That's what chronic inflammation does to our blood vessels. This rough surface can result in tears and dislodge even the smallest plaque, leading to blockages. Simultaneously, inflammation naturally constricts arteries, obstructing blood flow. Over time, this narrowing of arteries can be enough to trigger a heart attack. Animal studies have also shed light on the impact of microplastics on the heart. These studies have shown that exposure to microplastics can alter heart rate and impede cardiac function. This means that not only do microplastics increase the risk of heart disease, but they can also potentially affect the way our hearts function on a daily basis. The situation is even more concerning for populations already prone to heart conditions. For example, in India, people are known to develop heart disease at least a decade earlier than other populations. The constant exposure to microplastics can only exacerbate this risk. In conclusion, microplastics are not just tiny pieces of plastic floating around in our environment. They have infiltrated our bodies and are now posing a serious threat to our heart health. It's important that we understand the gravity of this situation and take necessary steps to mitigate this risk. Microplastics are not just a threat to the environment, they're a threat to our very hearts. Now that we know the danger, what can we do to protect ourselves? The first step in combating the microplastic menace is awareness. And now that we're armed with that, we can start making changes. It's about making conscious choices in our daily lives that reduce our exposure to these tiny, insidious particles. Let's start with packaging. Consider choosing products with natural fiber packaging over those wrapped in plastic. This can significantly cut down the amount of microplastics that leach into our food. Next, when it comes to our drinking water, we need to be cautious. Bottled water might seem like a safe choice, but studies have found that 1 liter of bottled water can contain an average of 240,000 plastic particles. A simple solution is to use trusted water filters at home and carry your own water in reusable bottles made of glass or stainless steel. We also need to rethink how we buy our fruits and vegetables. When possible, buy them directly from offline sources, such as local markets or farmers. Not only does this reduce the chance of microplastic contamination from plastic packaging, but it also supports local agriculture. And let's not forget about the microplastics lurking in our personal care products. Always check the labels and avoid products that contain polyethylene, PE, or polypropylene, PP. These are types of microplastics that can easily end up in our bodies. Lastly, it's time to rethink our use of plastic in the kitchen. Avoid microwaving food in plastic containers, as the heat can cause microplastics to leach into our food. Instead, use glass or ceramic containers that are microwave safe. We live in an age of convenience, but the convenience of plastic comes with a hidden cost. It may seem challenging to avoid microplastics completely, but even small changes can make a big difference. The fight against microplastics begins with conscious choices in our daily lives.